Welcome to Northlandia, a place to bring you curiosity because here you'll find curiosities. I'm Wyatt Buckner of the Duluth News Tribune, and I'll be your guide as we discover the unique and fascinating stories here in the Northland. Here we celebrate the region's distinctive people, places, and history. In this special episode, we take a look back at the stories we've been able to explore during our first full year of the podcast. Let's venture forth into Northlandia. Helping us reflect on the first year of the Northlandia podcast, I'm joined by the Northlandia reporting team with Jay Gabler, Teri Cadeau, and Jimmy Lovrien. It's great to have you all here on the podcast together for once.
Hi, Wyatt. It's good to be here.
Oh, good.
The honor is all ours.
All right, guys. So we've covered a lot of stories this last year, basically a whole year's worth, which is why we have a year anniversary here. This includes news stories and some throwbacks to the column that preceded the podcast. So let's just look back and talk about some of the stories that kind of stood out to us throughout the year. So as we talked about beforehand, let's start off with talk about the stories that you each got to work on that kind of stood out to each of you. That was kind of the most memorable for you to be able to learn more about, explore, learn about. Jay, we'll start with you. What was the most memorable story you got to work on?
You know, the one that came straight to mind was the experimental forest. The spruce project, the experiment. Yeah, it was amazing to walk into that space and see those towering science fictional structures and then learn about the real science that's actually happening there. That was absolutely fascinating and an experience that I will not soon forget.
Yeah, I feel like on the podcast, that's the most we've started to veer into real actual science-y studies and legitimate science. They're learning about how carbon dioxide is released from these peat bogs. There's real serious science behind it, although the setup itself kind of fits that quirky wait, really, this is here in the middle of the woods? But yet again, it's not quirky science. It's legitimate, you can understand it. We talked about in that episode of the podcast.
Yeah, that was a really cool story to be able to tell. I also remember our snowshoe priest story, which was pretty ordinary by Northlandia standards. But the fact that our source drove 3 hours just to talk to us for 20 minutes. I mean, she was passionate about that subject, this priest who, lived centuries ago and had a miraculous crossing of Lake Superior. And so that was definitely one where I was like, okay, I need to take this story very seriously because she spent 6 hours in the car in the space of 6.5 hours to do this interview with us.
That's why I kind of like doing some of these stories because not everyone, but a lot of the people we talk to are very passionate about these subjects. And from the outside, some of the subjects might seem a little odd and you'll wonder why, but then you actually get to talking to people and you find out why. And it's pretty cool. I mean, it's nothing to kind of laugh at necessarily. Their passion is genuine and real, and it's fun to talk to them.
Yeah, it's both the easiest and the hardest kind of stories that I write here at the newspaper, because on the one hand, if you're writing about something that nobody has written about ever or recently, okay, well, that's great. There's a lot of territory for you to explore. You don't need to worry about finding a distinctive angle. But at the same time, these are stories that you could easily write a book about. So how do you pull 800 words out of what could be a thick tome?
I feel like that was especially so with the one you did on the Iron Man, where you could have wrote a whole series about that. You had to do so much extra research outside of what we actually did in terms of gathering the interviews up there and such. You could be basically a historian for that one.
Yeah, that was super fun. I definitely want to follow up on the Iron Man story because I learned of the existence of a binder full of vintage photographs and clippings chronicling the entire history of the Iron Man, the building of the statue, the commissioning, all the different plans that they tried, all the things we heard about and had in our minds but haven't actually seen. Well, those images exist, so I want to go back and see those images and share some of them with sorry for podcast listeners, you'll just have to use your imagination still, but people who read the stories on the web.
Segueing then from the Iron Man in the Iron Range, let's move over to Teri then, who is
we're not leaving the Iron Range.
Well, I know, but you're always been a good consistent champion for stories on the Iron Range. I feel like most of the stories, even the ones you didn't do yourself, that we've done on the Iron Range came from a suggestion that came from you. So now let's move to you now. What has been some of the most memorable stories you've gotten to cover this year?
I couldn't just pick one. I kind of had three
That's fine.
together, which were kind of digging into stories of things that I looked at or saw when I was a child growing up on the Iron Range and went, why did that exist? Or why did that happen? Like, tell me more about this. I know this is a thing, but why and where did this come from? Getting into some of the origins of these things. So that's definitely true for like the Olcott Park Zoo. I'd been told several times by my parents, oh, that area right there used to have monkeys in it. And I was like, okay, thanks, Mom and Dad. Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. But it never hit me like, oh, like it was more than just monkeys. It was a full-on little zoo for 50 years, the first 50 years of the park's existence. So, I mean, I thought that was really fascinating to dig into and talk to people about. Also true with the Evelyn Clown Band. It's something that I would see in parades every summer growing up because we have multiple parades every summer and you see it and they kind of tend to be the ending number in a lot of parades. And I was like, okay, but where did this come from? Why is this a thing? And learning more and being able to talk to those people and find out about the history of it and how long exactly it's been going because it was a lot longer than I expected. I had no idea. It was a thing from after World War II. So that was really fun to kind of get into. Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, the last one would definitely be the gas station. Okay, the house that became a gas station that became a house again. And that was literally just because I watched that as I would drive to my parents' house in Gilbert over the years get turned from a gas station into a house and going, what is that like to live in a place that used to be this? And also then to find out that it started its life as a house in a different part of town that got moved there and turned into a gas station and then back and again, yeah. So that was really fun to dive into.
Mm-hmm. And I put that one up there on the list of stories where how you found them was a story of itself, how you had to call up different people to find. It was kind of a journey to get to the actual person that, on paper sounds like a simple enough story to be able to talk to, but it took a lot more involved to actually find the people behind the home.
Yeah, that was a lot, but it was worth it. I had fun.
Mm-hmm. And I always enjoy about your stories is that, like, for you, you're saying that these stories kind of speak to like getting answers to things like from growing up and such and diving into that, getting more understanding for something that you're kind of already aware of growing up. For me, not from the Iron Range, it's all brand new to me. So I hadn't heard of any of these things.
That's really fun.
Though I'm sure I've driven past that gas station home completely unawares that it was, in fact, a gas station at some point and then back to home and back and forth. So it's kind of been fun for me to kind of get a whole new perspective that I just had no idea about growing up pretty isolated in Duluth.
Well, and I think that's the thing that we all grew up with things that were like, oh, that's just a normal thing that has existed there for forever. And that's just a thing that is there. I mean, everyone has that about their neighborhoods or their places that they're like, oh, this is normal. And then you go someplace else and you learn that's not everywhere. That's not the case. It's like learning that top potato only exists in Minnesota, in the, the Midwest, and it doesn't exist out on the coast. It's things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, General Lovrien. We now move over to you.
Yeah. I think the most memorable stories to report involved being out on the St. Louis River. One being
which time?
Yeah, exactly. Right. When Clint and I, our photographer Clint Austin and I, rented a pontoon and went out to the stuffed animal graveyard. It's on the train bridge that rotates beneath the Bong Bridge. Anyway, I saw a post on Facebook that a kayaker had gone up to it, and there were all these like crucified stuffed animals on the side of this bridge, and I thought,
phrasing gets me every time. That phrasing.
And so I wanted to know more, and thankfully we wrote about it. Chuck Frederick, who is our opinion editor, wrote about it in, I believe, like the mid 90s, I think 95 or 96. And so it's been around for almost 30 years now, and the bridge operator who started it is no longer alive, but thankfully Chuck had tracked him down at that time and talked to him about why it started. So that was interesting, just because it's weird. Like, if you came across that in your boating, I mean, it's kind of creepy. Well, it's really creepy. And to know that has existed for so long, I thought was interesting. And at one point included mannequins until we published one of the articles in the 90s and with photos of the mannequins, and then the next day they disappeared. So anyway, there's that. And then
that was probably the number one story, I'd say, where I felt the most left out, that you guys went without me. And I was like, I wanted to, that would have been a cool video, or at least maybe a more creepy video is a more accurate way to say it. But I felt a little jealous on that one.
I forgot if it came together kind of last minute or you were off or something, but we were originally going to paddle out there in a canoe. But thankfully, we didn't, because it ended up being a wavy day, and it was a lot more fun being on a pontoon.
Yeah. Well, safer for the camera equipment
Yeah, exactly.
as well, you know.
Exactly. I did. There was one good wave or one good whatever with a pontoon going into a wave that splashed Clint, but all the camera gear was okay. So and it was a nice summer day. I was also out on the St. Louis River 2 months ago now on a very nice, seasonably warm November day, tracking down we spent the full day going along the border, which I've done a couple stories on, thanks to surveyor Dale Luke, who is very passionate about historic surveys and is a wealth of information on that in the history of why the border between Minnesota and Wisconsin is the way it is. And so we did one story on why there are slivers of what everyone would think of as Duluth is actually Wisconsin, because... Well, read it. It's a long story. Anyway, and also when you get further up the river, why is the only straight section of border between Minnesota and Wisconsin the way it is? Well, it's because the surveyor 170 years ago now, was instructed to go set the border, where the rapids began on the St. Louis River after the Indian Village. It was kind of the instructions written out for him. And so he did that, but the water was high and it was hard to tell where the rapids began. So he decided that he was going to set where the rapids began, where he, as one person in a canoe, could no longer paddle any further. And so that's where he decided the rapids began. And that's where he set the straight line, which stretches 40 miles south to the St. Croix River. And so just learning about that history and then being out there, kind of, this guy, Dale Luke, he wanted to see kind of the survey points and see what this surveyor, George Stuntz, saw, 170 years ago. So that was fun. It was a long day, but it was a really nice day, and it's always good to be out on the water. So
yeah, see, that one I was a little less jealous of, only because of the length of time.
Yes.
I'm perfectly happy just hearing about your reporting on it.
Right. We were out past sunset. I mean, we made it back. We could see, but it was, we were like... past Chambers Grove Park, and I'm like looking at my watch like, okay, we got to turn around. We did. It was all good. We made it. It was all fine. It was good, but it was getting dark and cold.
Mm-hmm. And for Teri and Jay, Jimmy touched on a little. Was there any like specific moments that stood out to you while gathering these separate stories? Like for me, one story we did with Teri from way back earlier in the podcast, I think it was like episode 7, I believe, on Tony's Trading Post when we went out there. We went separately. I got there right before you, and like it's a lengthy driveway to get there, and these lots of colorful signs saying this is private property. Proceed at your own risk, and you keep going. It's like you've been warned. Trespassers will be, If you've ever been by these kind of private properties, you can kind of infer what I'm meaning with some of the signs might be making it very clear that you're trespassing. And I remember being very like, oh gosh. And then the service wasn't great, so I couldn't get a hold of you. But then you pull up behind me.
I'm right behind you like the whole time. Like, what is he doing? Why are you stopped?
Because I was reading the signs.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Jed Carlson is already way up there, already endearing himself. Like he was definitely braver than me. Ingratiating himself, already making friends, already talking, already having a great time, And the guy was super friendly, so like there was no danger at all. But when you first see those signs, it's like, oh no, what am I? I hope I'm at the right property.
Yeah, there was one moment of like, I did see one sign, and I did have a moment of like, is this right? No, this is definitely right. This is right. Mm-hmm. And then I saw you pulling ahead. I'm like, okay, well, we're both wrong. If anything, yeah. But it was fine. It was good.
Mm-hmm.
The moment that jumps out at me was actually a moment that happened not during the reporting of a story, but that inspired the reporting of a story. Way back to just over a year ago, there were a bunch of modern quilters, different than traditional quilters, I learned, and they went for a quilt walk in Canal Park. So I went to tell that story. So I followed all these quilters around there wearing their quilts. It was very cold. They, went up on the lift bridge. They're promoting an upcoming show they had, and I was the press. They were hoping to drum up. Anyway, so we're all standing there on the lift bridge over the ship canal. They're all in their quilts. Everybody's kind of looking up at us. And one of the older quilters just sort of comments as we're standing there in the middle of the lift bridge span. She says, you used to be able to ride this. I did when I was a kid. You'd ride it up and you'd drop pennies in the stacks of the freighters. And I just did a happy little dance on my head because I was like, this is a story. And so, she and her brother both remember. And I got more information from local historian Tony Durkins. And so that turned into the story of how you used to be able to ride the aerial lift bridge for a quarter.
Yeah, that was a pretty good story. Because growing up in Duluth, I've seen the lift bridge like my entire life. I don't remember memory not knowing what the lift bridge was, but definitely was not aware of that little fact. That would have been interesting / also terrifying. I think we talked about on that episode about how, like, you had that fear of like, what if I get trapped on the lift bridge? But apparently people used to do that. They had to sit in a cage and ride up and down the lift bridge. They
called it the monkey cage, which sort of ties it to Olcott Park.
Oh my gosh. And then for you, Jay, an memorable story for me, because we've done a lot of traveling around, especially the Iron Range lately. We've done a lot of Iron Range related stories in recent months, probably thanks to large part of Teri's recommendations. Shaking her head, but I don't think that's entirely true.
Well, I didn't give you the cane legs. That was all you.
That one's fair. Which that is actually the one I was gonna reference, of like the venturing down to look at the Dayton figures that they have on display there, and going into the basement, seeing the pile hoard of them, which I feel like we've saw the photos just look a little startling when you just kind of see these figures kind of thrown about in these bins downstairs. It's even more startling when you're actually in person, with my little camera light kind of being the primary source of light down there. It's kind of a fun experience, and just and Pamela is just such a great quirky character as she's interacting with these things. Like, oh, this one's my favorite. Oh, it's missing a head. Where's its head? It's just like, I'm glad I was able to work that into the video. So I made for a fun video edit for me.
Yeah, it's great to have the video component with all these stories, as well as, of course, the podcast component, because for a story like that Cane Lakes Candies story, you've got the moving animatronic figurines, you've got the whole creepy basement, which is actually very well maintained. It's creepy only because there are, beheaded figures lying down there. But yeah, then you've got the candy making process. You've got the twin sisters who are, scions of a candy making dynasty in the Northland. And so to be able to get all that on video is definitely thousands and thousands of words that I could not have written.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, listeners of the podcast, I highly encourage you to go check out the articles for these stories, because then you can also get the photos and the videos and the written word in addition to our conversations about them. So now that we talked about the stories that have stood out to you that you got to report on, let's talk about the stories you've gotten to read or listen about from our fellow reporters here. So maybe, Jimmy, we'll start with you. What were some of the stories that kind of stood out to you? Like, obviously you had the ones that you worked on, but then you read or listened to the other ones that were like, that's interesting.
Well, I'm glad that Robot Rickshaw made it into Northlandia, because I think he might embody the Northlandia spirit quite well. And so, a musician who has created a robotic, orchestra, band, whatever, instruments, and does things that are absurd, and that just fits Northlandia. So
then now it's an interesting one. You can almost do follow-ups on him as well, because it sounds like his setup changes quite from year to year potentially. So you might have a whole different setup now that he's planning going into the summer season. So you should probably keep an eye out for what he ends up having come out of that.
Right.
He had a religious ceremony, essentially, or a religious adjacent ceremony at Sacred Heart during Homegrown last year.
Care to elaborate? What does that mean?
Oh yeah, it was a whole musical interactive event with a choir, and he played and he also preached. It's hard to describe. Some people got food. It was a pretty epic experience, but speaks to his interest in thinking outside the box when it comes to Duluth music and entertainment. And I think we all know what thinking inside the box when it comes to Duluth music and entertainment is. So there's a lot of room to explore there.
Mm-hmm. Huh, that's interesting.
No, I also liked the various ones. I think there's been multiple looks at statues by Teri. The Great Gatsby sticks out as being one that, the whole Great Gatsby myth isn't right because it's a real person, but
cat.
Yeah, the cat was a real cat who hung around Duluth East, sometimes in the school, was kind of their unofficial mascot. And then when he or she was hit by a car, there's a bronze memorial statue for him. And so looking into the origins of that and other statues, Teri, I've liked those because I think just the quirkiness behind those can always be interesting and kind of one of those roadside things or trailside things that people look at and wonder why, how, and you've kind of enlightened us on a few of those. What are some of the others that I'm
Well, in that same story, we also took a look at the Sawyer statue on the range, which I really wanted to do because there's no plaque. Like Catsby, there's a nice plaque, there's a QR code, there's like, I think it's maybe says the Sawyer, but there's no like information of like, here's what the idea is behind this. There's nothing there. It's just like, and here's this. Why? What? Okay, I understand there's a connection to Virginia, obviously, because it used to be a sawmill. I get that, but anything else?
I didn't know that. I didn't get
well,
that.
I know that because I
Right.
grew up going, because I grew up going to the Virginia Historical Society and and seeing those things and learning about it, the logging industry that used to be there. But other than that, there's no explanation. And it kind of looks like his legs are cut off, but they're not meant to be cut off. It's just literally a silhouette. It's just the way it's done.
Mm-hmm.
And so I finally got to talk to the man himself who designed and created that statue. And I was like, wow, okay, finally some more information about what is this? And then talking with the creator of the Catsby statue too was pretty fun. It's really fun to have this chance to talk to the artist who created some of these things was really, really phenomenal.
Mm-hmm. Jay, what was it that you said about the Sawyer statue when we were there? I can't remember what the comment was. I think I reiterated it to the best of my memory on that episode. But
Kind of looks like a fan. Looks like it's like an indoor fan. And, I'm jumping my turn a little bit here, but I wanted to say, in terms of stories other people have written that we've appreciated, Teri, I enjoy your stories, but I particularly appreciate it when Wyatt and I are out and about and I get to sort of virtually tag along because we go and gather visuals for, your stories if we happen to be in the neighborhood of something you're writing about. So that was how I got to spend time taking a good long look at that Sawyer statue. So I was well acquainted with it while Wyatt took photos. By the time your story came out, I was primed to learn more about that statue. And similarly got to take a look at the Monkey Island.
Oh yeah.
The remnants, the tower. And that's just fascinating now to know that was a monkey tower. That tower looks like a little like anger tower built for monkeys. That's what it was. I even went up and took a look in. I'm like, why? Do you want to come look in? And he's like, well, why?
Now, if we're talking about we're criticizing the Sawyer statue for having limited information, that had no information there. Like if I didn't know that's what the assignment was and that's what we were doing, I'd be like, okay, what is this thing? Is it fancy kind of like it's a tower structure thing and there's a garden bed? I don't know. There's literally nothing there. And the monkey related statue, that the memorial statue is much further away.
Yeah, I don't know. That's why when I was a kid, like with my parents being like, "Oh, hey, there used to be monkeys there," I was like, "What? No, that can't be real." And so then later finding out, like, no, they actually were. They're really monkeys. It was Monkey Island. Okay, but there was an Iron Range story that besides the Dayton's statues, because I had no idea about those. But I had no idea about the movie theater. That was supposed to be under the underground mine turned into a movie theater. Is that basically? Yeah. Yep. In Eveleth, I was like, I'm sorry, what? There was going to be a what? And
wow, you stumped Teri on an Iron Range fact.
I was just like, that is.
From there?
Out for blood now.
Tell me again about Alexander. And no. And your famous stone. Okay. Anyway.
No. Yeah, that was a fun one to do. Just it came up and they kind of stole it. I mean, I got the idea borrowed the idea of it was mentioned in a PBS North program called Minnesota Historia, where they kind of mentioned it offhand. They were doing a story kind of more broadly about this mine and the explosions that were happening in town, and it was kind of mentioned and it also had an underground theater, and I was like, what? Kind of like what you're describing, and so I kind of went down the rabbit hole or whatever you want to call it.
The mining hole?
Right, exactly. The mine shaft and learning about this and what musician groups and films and, performed for the miners on their lunches. And it was usually safety films, but they had bands formed among miners that would perform down there. So it's still there allegedly, but it's underwater.
I appreciate that podcast episode because, Wyatt, you really pushed Jimmy on the question of, but why can't we go there?
I mean, if you know how to scuba, no.
Well, right. I liked how we mentioned in that episode about, we could do a joint venture down there with the Minnesota Historian people. And then Mike Schultz, producer of the show, commented on Facebook saying, let's go. He sounded down for it. I don't know how feasible that is in the budget, but maybe one day.
And And then the other one that definitely from others was learning about the PBS mascots and how they were like these handmade costumes and whatnot from Joe. That was really fun because I have photos with some of those old mascots, and I'm like, what are these? What are they supposed to be?
That was one.
What is a razzleberry?
That was one of my favorite ones to just talk about, because that was when I was like triggered like childhood memories that like I had no idea. I had like Bluther Razzleberry. I'm like, who are you? What?
Cosmo.
But Cosmo.
I have a photo with Cosmos.
Cosmos, yeah. And then, but then you see the images like, oh my gosh, this unlocks this childhood memory. Like, I remember these characters, and so like that was for me, like, you know, Duluth resident and stuff. Like I grew up with that, so that was just such a weird like, didn't know about that. And the comments were also like kind of that way as well. Like, whoa, childhood memory unlocked.
100%.
I didn't grow up with PBS North. I grew up on PBS, but not this, you know, the station up here. So
I didn't think I did either, but apparently I did, because I remember those characters.
Right. Those characters were new to me, but they would also bring in costumes from shows I remember on PBS Kids, like Zaboomafoo. And so there's like a photo of a very like, if I'm remembering it correctly, there's one of these mascots, you know, the PBS North special mascot next to Zaboomafoo, a lemur in real life, but it's got like yellow eyes. It looks like he's got yellow fever, and it's just kind of sitting there like very depressed. And I just got a kick out of that. I was like, that is not how I remember Zaboomafoo from my youth, but it was a good image to see nonetheless.
Kind of like if the Times Square mascots had an actual children's show.
Right?
Another one I really enjoyed talking about, Jimmy, was the Pattons one.
Oh, yeah.
There was some weird Pattons, like the cow on skates, and that's when I guess I was behind the times with learning this information, where I learned the pizza rolls originated from Duluth.
Indeed.
I was very behind on that fact, because apparently it was a fairly well-known fact, and I just didn't know it.
And let's not forget the nipple enhancers with Duluth roots.
That was one of the most startling ones. I was like, wait, what?
I think, yeah, so I was at the public library, Duluth Public Library, because they've got our microfilm, and they're an awesome resource. And I was pulling files for probably a different Northlandia, and I can't remember which one. And one of the reference librarians said, oh, you should pull the file on inventions and patents, or, you know, patents, whatever. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that sounds interesting. She's like, there's some interesting things in there. It's like, okay, you know, and so I wasn't really sure what to expect. And I was actually you can look up patents on Google Patents, I think it's called, and it searches the public filings for you. And so I was just searching Duluth and all these different things, and I was coming across my own weird ones, like this costume in which you would be a cow or some other animal with your front arm, your hands have skates, and then your feet, you have skates on your feet, and then you go perform as a animal, and it's supposed to like revolutionize, you know, ice skating shows, because then you don't need two people, you know, like the cartoon thing where it's one person is the head of the horse, and the person's the rear, and they have to hold on to each other, and then they become disconnected. Well, that's solved now, because I
want to see this in action, because
I know we should build it.
Because looking at it, I'm like, I feel I'm a pretty confident skater. I don't know how I feel about that confidence wise, in terms of like not falling on my face.
Right. And we found out a little bit more about the guy who supposedly made it. He was a longtime ice figure skating instructor in like the teens, 20s, 30s, I think. But that was all before I actually pulled the file from the library on patents in Duluth. And when I did that, I think I know what the reference librarian was referring to, and that was probably the nipple enhancers. So that,
amazing.
Yeah, which was a Duluth East grad made them, and we included it in our paper and stuff. And so there were clippings in that from 20 years ago or so when they came out. But yeah, that was unique.
My dream for you, Jimmy, is to get invited on Lori and Julia's radio show in the Twin Cities to talk to them about their origins enhancing Northland nipples.
Right.
Yeah, where's that collaboration?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because they were the inventors, and they now have a talk show in the Twin Cities. So yeah, that their collaboration has, you know, maybe these nipple enhancers no longer that I could find are marketed or sold, but they remain friends and talk show host partners. So
I'll bet the skating cow guy would have been a pretty good radio host too.
Yeah. Yes. I think I could see him, emceeing something, Disney on Ice or, one of those types of things. I think that's what he would have loved to do in retirement.
I feel like we can make a good case for many of the characters we've gotten to introduce in this series could be good hosts for some kind of show of some kind. Not all, but a lot of them I feel like they're interesting enough where they could carry a series of some kind.
Some cooking shows, some religious shows, some unclassifiable talk shows.
Some shows from cemeteries.
Oh yeah, there was a few cemetery stories there as well. So you guys touched on this a little bit here and there, but what were some of the stories that kind of surprised you the most? Either like surprised you while gathering it, or surprised you like while reading or learning about it? Obviously, the nipple enhancer sounds kind of surprising.
That was a surprise, yes.
A startling surprise for me.
The Palucci Space Theater. And I'm glad we actually got that on audio. This is on the podcast. The moment where our host opened up a trapdoor, Kevin Milani opened a trapdoor in the floor of the lobby of the Palucci Space Theater. And he told us ahead of time that the point of opening this trapdoor was so we could see the vast space underneath the Palucci Space Theater where there was going to be water to be heated by the solar panels that were never purchased nor installed. But until I saw it with my own eyes, I did not appreciate. They have a ballroom beneath this planetarium, basically waiting to be filled with water when someday they finally buy those solar panels. And I gasped. So I'm glad that we were recording that, and that's on the podcast.
Mm-hmm. I was very startled, like the camera in there, and looked down, like, okay, I don't want to fall in here. They will not get me out if I do.
And I know I do not have a follow-up explaining what the white stuff is that's piled up down there. There's this kind of like white powdery material that could either have been intentionally placed down there to absorb moisture, or maybe I've done a little Googling and it seems that sometimes when you have concrete that just sits underground doing nothing for decades, it can exude some of this stuff. Mm-hmm. I have placed a call into Minnesota North College, and the person who answered the phone said, I'm going to pass that question to the dean. The dean has not got back to me with that answer yet.
What's that called? Efflorescence?
Efflorescence, yeah. Is it? Yeah. Who knows? Who can say?
I was surprised often by how willing people were to talk to you about some of these things, because it's a weird phone call to make, to be like, hi, did your house used to be a gas station? Will you talk to me about that on, both in interview and for a podcast and for a column in the paper? And he was like, yeah, that's fine. That's great. Let's talk. Because that's a weird phone call to make, as well as calling a bunch of people to be like, hey, you know how you spend time in graveyards documenting people's remains and where they are and places? Would you mind talking to me a little bit about that? And again, super willing, all very, very willing to talk. And yet some stories came together that seemed like really, really easy ideas. I'm not going to name it, but it seemed like they would come together really easily, then ended up being very difficult. I'm not going to name those because that's not polite, but
and again, they could come back around at some point. Who knows? So we don't want to. Oh no! All right. There's some other ones that might though, but I know that everyone here has had one point or another in this last year some unexplained hiccups in the process of trying to make the story happen.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what I mean, is it's very much a balance of sometimes it goes really, really easily, and you talk to like 4 people about statues in one evening, and you're like, wow, that was way easier than I thought. And other nights where you're just like, I just want them to answer their phone.
Couple surprising moments for me. It's a different kind of surprising. It's more like, oh, that's interesting. So we had one, we're pretty consistent with the order of our episodes, but we had one switch around back around episode 12 and 13 got switched around, where we did Father Berga one episode sooner than it was originally going to be, because your story, Jimmy, on the Black Beach had to be pushed back because you were waiting on an important question about is the taconite tillings safe for people? And it was just kind of surprising. And then you were struggling, or like you're getting kind of the runaround on who actually has the answer to that question. So the surprising / startling aspect of that is like, is it really taking that long to get that question answered on a very like popular public beach that people go in and spend a lot of time at and enjoy quite frequently? So that was ultimately it worked out, but like that was alarming that it took that long to get that question answered.
You're right. Thank you for refreshing my memory. Besides nipple enhancers, whether or not it's safe to be on North Shore's Black Beach and Silver Bay, whether it's safe, that actually, that took more reporting in waiting than I expected. And the answer is, okay, so background, there's this beach. It's become very popular thanks to the internet and social media in Silver Bay that is black, in quotes, sand, and photogenic, yada, yada, yada. It's made out of taconite tailings, the waste from the North Shore mining, well, the former, throughout like the late 50s into the 70s, I think right up until about 1980, all of the waste rock that wasn't iron ore was just dumped straight into Lake Superior until they built a basin inland to store it. And if you were alive at the time, people remember the photos of the sludge just coming down a chute right into Lake Superior. Well, that would get carried and formed a delta and formed beaches. And anyway, people kind of have this in their mind that like, well, we found asbestos-like fibers in those tailings and in the lake. And, you know, the water we weren't supposed to drink it for, you know, a brief amount of time. And so I kind of wanted to answer the question, is it safe to go play on and bathe on and, you know, all these things? And so I got a hold finally of a retired U of M, I believe he's a physician and researcher, who said, you will be fine unless you're there working, you know, 8 to 10 hour shifts for 40 years or something, because, and this gets confusing, so I'm sorry I'm taking so much time.
No, you're good.
This is why we had to delay it a week, is because the asbestos-like fibers were not, they were too small. They probably, you know, asbestos is a certain length and would get caught in your lungs and cause irritation. These fibers were probably small enough that your immune system would clear them out, and they would not cause the mesothelioma, which I have struggled to pronounce, and I think I tried to avoid saying in the podcast, but I think I got it right. Anyway, it wouldn't cause mesothelioma because they were small enough. So anyway, his advice was you're probably fine, but also there's other things in sand like silica, and that exists everywhere, and that's bad for your lungs too. So yeah.
I'm sorry for all you listeners that you didn't get to actually see Jimmy gesturing towards his lungs to demonstrate the process by which an asbestos fiber might get caught or not.
Well, you can cut as much as you need out of that.
No, it's staying. It's staying.
It's a long explanation.
So you're as safe as you basically are anywhere.
Yeah.
Which is to say that you're not safe anywhere. No.
Right.
You're safe nowhere. Nowhere is safe. Just kidding.
I think shortly after that article came out, I was part of the Institute of Journalism and Natural Resources, Lake Superior Institute, where we spent a week doing journalism across the Northland, and we stayed in. So I was with other journalists from the United States and Canada, and we're in Silver Bay, and our the staff were like, "Hey, near our hotel, there's this black sand beach. We're gonna walk there after dinner after we get settled in." So go there. I'm like, "Hey, you guys are all environmental journalists. Here's something I wrote, and now you know." And it was funny because it's like we get to the hotel and there's like Black Beach t-shirts, coffee mugs, everything is branded like Black Beach. and there is, I think everyone kind of got a kick out of like, wow, this is once a huge environmental disaster and story, and now we are recreating on it.
Now people get married there.
Yeah, exactly.
We won't talk about the history of Bayfront Festival Park.
That's a whole other can of worms.
Right.
No, not that can of worms.
Yeah. No, rest in peace, can of worms. So with all these stories now, because it's been a year since launching this podcast, and even longer for some of the stories that we did throwbacks for, have there been any updates to some of your stories that maybe aren't big enough to warrant, say, a whole dedicated episode that we have for some other ones? But I know it's been a year, so things have happened here and there. I know what kind of prompted this thought was when Jay and I were traveling back from Virginia from a series of stories we gathered there. We were talking about the Story Art and Museum with the doll.
Faithwick's dolls.
Yeah, Faithwick's dolls. And we were like, oh, what happened to them? And we got a not so happy update that Jay looked up while I was driving.
Yeah, the Story Art and Museum closed just a few months after we published our Northlandia story. And, you know, as you were saying, Wyatt, before we recorded the podcast, the good news is surely the dolls and the art have been preserved. But Heidi Wick, Faith's daughter's dream of establishing a permanent museum for people to come and enjoy her mother's art and also perhaps have community meetings, etc., appears to have not been sustainable in that specific space. which is a bummer. But I do hope to follow up and find out what has become of Faith Wick's historic doll collection.
Mm-hmm. I hope so. I really liked how that story turned out, and it was really interesting to learn about all those dolls, which are both, dolls are a little creepy to a certain extent, but it was just really cool to see all those as well. But were there any other updates you guys have that are worth sharing since launching the show?
So we had a story about the Olcott Park Zoo, and specifically mostly about Monkey Island. And one of the questions that we had at that time was, okay, so they had these monkeys and they rented them, but where did they rent them from? And since that story published, I got an email from a man who's like, I'm pretty sure I remember my father was part of this whole system. And he noted that a lot of them came from a U of M research project, which caused a lot of problems when a lot of them then were killed / died due to vandals because they were doing research on these monkeys and then their research stopped. So that's an interesting update, I thought. I was like, okay, good to know.
In science, we call that a missing data problem.
Yeah, I haven't gone too deep into that. I haven't followed into that much, but that's what I got from a reader who was like, hey, just so you know, pretty sure this is what happened. And I'm like, yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so update on the Smile Rock, if you remember that, along Leicester River.
Yeah, on Amity Creek.
Yeah, yep, thank you, Amity Creek. In Leicester Park, Amity Creek in Leicester Park, there's a rock that since the 50s or 60s has been painted with first a very nice smile. And it says, smile, it adds to your face value. And then over the years, it would fade and get kind of replaced with spray painted versions that are just kind of smileys with the tongue hanging out. And then when I went to go get an updated photo, it was gone. So I asked the city what happened. I don't have an update to that. They didn't respond. I mean, fair enough. There's bigger fish to fry. Then I was kind of curious, if this was something that they would, try to combat, or if it's been around long enough that they would leave, or how do they decide what's art versus graffiti? But fair enough. There's other things happening in the city that they didn't get back to me on that. But I think, again, to Chuck Frederick, our opinion editor, who did an article back in 2008 about it, several articles back in 2008 about the origins, he was able to kind of figure out from people who remembered that this Paul Asula was the guy who originally put it up. And he lived at the top of Seven Bridges Road on Maxwell, and he would walk up and down the road to catch the bus to get into town, and people remember that. And then there was a line in there that was about, he was once featured on a local TV station walking the road or whatever. So the photographer who worked at the WDIO in the early 70s emailed me and he was like, hey, I have the video, here it is, and it's the video of this Paul Lasua who made the first Smile Rock, hiking up Seven Bridges Road, which was gravel at the time, to James Taylor's song Country Road. It was a weather feature he did in 1972. This Mark Ryan did for WDIO, and he didn't realize that this was the Smile Rock guy until he read Chuck Frederick's 2008 story. And then he also provided me some stories of the rock over the years, because we had updated shot of nothing, a really old photo of what it probably kind of originally looked like, and then thanks to Google Photos and archives over the years, some polls kind of in the last 20 years what it kind of looked like. And he's a longtime photographer, and so he kind of filled in some gaps of what the Smiley Rock looked over the years. So I've kind of thought of maybe doing an update with that, just because it's cool. We've got video that he gave us, he said was okay to use, but of the guy behind it walking the road that many people remember. So we'll see.
This is why when readers click on some of these stories, they say subscribers only, and we ask you to, pay something, subscribe to the paper to read these stories, because if the DNT goes under for lack of subscriptions, who is going to chronicle the history of the Smiley Rock?
This is crucial. This is, yes.
And it's not just a one article. Right, it's an ongoing project.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. It's the gift that keeps on giving.
Yep.
All right, guys. So now looking ahead now we've finished a year, moving on, looking ahead to the next year. What are some topics you're hoping to learn more about or explore in this coming year, or things you kind of want to play around with? I know one thing we're trying out with the podcast now is bring guests on the podcast. At the time of this recording, we just released our episode with Marius Anderson talking about the filming of his adventure documentary, 40 Below. We're going to have some other plans for upcoming guests as well. But looking forward, is there anything that you guys are kind of hoping to kind of look into or touch on? Maybe anything that you can shout out, like, hey, I'm looking to learn more about this. Can someone maybe point me in the right direction or something?
I have some designs on hidden and subterranean spaces in Duluth. I don't want to give away any, hot story ideas to competitors who may be listening, but there is a lot going on underground in Duluth, and I would like to get into some of those spaces and bring you, Wyatt, and our audience with me.
Similar to Jay's description earlier of Jimmy with his describing the medical effects. Listeners, you have to imagine how Jay just kind of leaned forward, wiggled his fingers together in a very almost seemingly maniacal way when his eyebrow was raising. There was quite a visual which is why I laughed when he initially started talking about it.
I have an idea for one that would be really good in the summer. It involves me going back up to the Iron Range to my absolute favorite beach in the world, which is on Lake Orbegon, which is not actually a lake, but a former mine pit. It's been filled up with water. And would you know it, it's one of the premier places in the area to go scuba diving.
Oh.
And so I feel like that could be really fun to get into and talk to some of the folks who are into that up there.
Mm-hmm. I think that's the best lake name in Minnesota.
Oh, it is fantastic.
I remember that being like a topic of discussion once about on Northlandia meeting about like we could just do a whole column entry about the different names of lakes in Minnesota. That being a prime example of one that's like, wait, okay.
Well, that one I think was voted on. Don't quote me on that, but I want to say it was an idea. They had a contest, and I think that one was the winner of the contest. But I'm not, again, 100% sure on that. Gotta dig into it. Gotta look into it.
Mm-hmm. And it's only going to get more interesting as a scuba diving destination once they start launching rockets to the moon from the flooded ore mine.
Actually, I was going to tell you, the rocket launching, that should be the new use of the former Silver Bay Airport. Okay, sorry.
Oh, rip. Yeah, I guess kind of talking about this, I want to do more stories on history that if it's not told soon, we might not have those sources around anymore, if that makes sense, And so if there are ideas of that maybe there's a couple people who remember X, Y, and Z from however many years ago, let's get that recorded, because I think it would be, interesting to have that in writing before we kind of lose these primary sources, whether, living primary sources, I guess. And because I think that makes things way more interesting than, newspaper clippings are great and I rely on them all the time. But yeah, to supplement those with some living people. So I don't know if there's something weird or interesting that you've been curious about and who's behind it, get me in touch with them, because I think those make some good stories that we can hopefully record before, the people who would tell them are no longer here.
So last question I have for you guys. This is going off an idea, something we talked about in a Northlandia meeting, or jokingly talked about in a Northlandia meeting like many months ago. Now looking back a year now, if you had to nominate someone, a character that we've gone to learn about in Northlandia for mayor of Northlandia, who would you nominate?
Robot Rickshaw.
Yeah. That was a quick one. Actually, that makes perfect sense, actually. I would have to nominate Gordon Bushnell, who aspired to build a 200-mile road all by himself. Didn't accomplish it, but man, you gotta love the effort. That's such a weird Northland thing.
Indeed, and I'm working on an update, because after I did a call out if people knew him or were related to him to reach out, and boy did they. So coming soon, or maybe before this is...
Yeah, it would already be out at this point.
Well, go look back on this article I wrote
that would be
about Gordon Bushnell.
Episode 48. Go check that out.
Yes.
Well, if we're allowed to bring people back to serve as mayor, I think my nomination would have to be Veda Punikvar, the late newspaper woman in Chisholm, who was responsible for making the Iron Man a reality, as well as being the power player in Iron Range politics, so I am told, for much of the 20th century. She seems like a fascinating figure. And if we're really nominating a mayor, I mean, you want someone who's going to get things done.
Well, that's true.
And demonstrably, Veda Punikvar got things done.
That's true. If we're talking about mayor, I guess that is some good qualities to have. So we have Troy Rogers, Robot Rickshaw. We got Gordon Bushnell. And Veda Punikvar.
The Great Gatsby, because I think animal mayors are fantastic. But again, that would require bringing back from the dead.
Yeah. So for the record, 3 of our nominees are all. Troy Rogers is the only one who's currently still living, but in the eternal ether that is Northlandia. Yeah. So in the normal Northlandia, being alive is not necessarily a requirement.
Right. I would have nominated Bishop Baraga, but I think we should have separation of church and state.
Yeah,
Agreed. Agreed.
Same with the polka priest.
Same with Father Perkovich. I'm like, he's great, but no.
I was at the dedication of the Great Gatsby statue when I was a reporter for the Eastern Observer community paper here. No longer exists, but they made an offering with catnip.
Yes,
and I just think that's an important detail.
That's so beautiful
to bring up with the Great Gatsby. It was a great service.
The squirrels had the time of their lives.
Well, I just think, isn't there a city, or there was a city in Minnesota that had a dog as a mayor for a period of time, and they got a lot of attention. So I'm just saying,
right?
Great Gatsby.
Mm-hmm. I think all of those would be good choices for mayor of Northlandia.
Exactly.
Curiosities and unique stories. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining. It's a lot of fun having all of us here. I mean, we have these meetings every month talking about different Northlandia ideas, so it's kind of fun to kind of bring that to the podcast a little bit, and hope to do it again sometime in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Wyatt. Thanks, Jimmy. Thanks, Teri. It's fun being part of this quirky team.
It's weird not being asked the question, how does this fit into Northlandia, as the last question. But I would say, I think we've answered it through the entire episode.
It's true. How do we fit in Northlandia?
Because we report on it.
All right, thanks, guys. And listeners, thank you for joining us in this last year of Northlandia. We look forward to another year of bringing you the Northland's curious and unique stories. You can follow the Northlandia column by visiting duluthnewstribune.com/topics/Northlandia. There you can also find all the episodes of the Northlandia podcast. If you've enjoyed the last year of this podcast and would like to support us, consider becoming a subscriber of the Duluth News Tribune at duluthnewstribune.com/subscribe. Join us again next week and discover the extraordinary stories that you just might miss. We're now in the right place at the right time, ready to step off the beaten path with no rush to return, here in Northlandia.